And one reason it's a highlight is because I get to hear really bright, enthusiastic young activists like Ursula. And so this past week, when I heard Diana Olbaum speak about prioritizing peace, Diana is a senior a policy analyst for FCNL. I was thrilled that we would have an opportunity to hear Ursula because she is one of the rising generation of activists that is really making a difference in the world. She's has an MA in International Peace and Conflict Resolution from American University, and she's been involved with many organizations like Alliance for Peace Building, Women for International Security, and STAND, a student and youth-led movement to end mass atrocities. So what's great about her is that she's actually working on a vision for peacemaking worldwide. And with this new administration, hopefully this vision could, to some degree, be implemented. So I'm really excited to hear about her vision and what FCNL is doing to promote peace building in today's world. So Ursula, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. And I will say it's nice to be with LA in spirit. My dad grew up in Azusa, and my grandma is still there, and I have lots of family across Southern California. My parents joke they're in a divided marriage because my mother is from the Bay Area. And so always lots of conversations at the table, and I appreciate being here in community with you all, even though we aren't physically all together. Before I get started, I just wanted to say the slides I put together, I'm not going to go through every little thing on them, but I thought looking at some of your other presentations that you guys have had at this forum, you would be interested in some more of the nitty-gritty details. So I thought I would share them. We don't have to stay in like a really technical space or anything, and I will try as hard as I can not to use jargon and acronyms every 5 seconds. If I do, please just ping me in the chat or shout or wave your hands. I want to make this an interesting conversation for everyone, not just sort of me talking at you. So with that, I will try and share my screen. And, oh, I'm sorry, if the host can let me share my screen.
Yes, just 1 second.
No problem. Thank you, Susan.
Try that, see if that works.
Perfect. Okay, can everyone see this blue slide? Okay, great. So I know several of you had mentioned that you guys are Quakers in this group, but I just wanted to very quickly start by saying FCNL is the Friends Committee on National Legislation, and we are a Quaker lobby that was founded in the midst of World War II, and that we advocate for peace, justice, and environmental stewardship. We have expanded and changed our focus every 2 years with the new Congress, really looking at what are the issues that face our country, our community as a whole. And one thing that's stayed consistent across the 75 plus years we've existed is a commitment to peace. So I'm going to, there we go. So I am FCNL's legislative representative for peace building policy. And I think I am the only registered lobbyist in DC with peace building as my portfolio. And so I'm very thankful for FCNL putting this commitment behind advancing peace building policy. And at FCNL, we realize ending war is just not enough. Ending war is so important. But if we're not advocating for an alternative vision, for another way of engaging in the world, another way of thinking about international relations, we're not doing enough. And so that's where the peace building part of our lobby efforts come in. It's really pushing for the prevention of deadly conflict and lifting up the alternative approaches. And so that's what my report is about. And I'll kind of walk you through the report in a second, but I heard you say you'd be interested in hearing a little bit about me. So before we dig into this alternative vision, I thought I'd share kind of what brought me to peace building and what made it interesting for me. So growing up, I grew up in Alaska, and it was, a lovely, idyllic childhood. And one summer while studying abroad, I met another student who was from Northern Ireland. And it really just sort of woke me up to the fact that children my age who were, dealing with history exams and, acne and all that kind of stuff were also dealing with war. And that not everyone had the beautiful, idyllic childhood that I did. So that really made me start asking questions about why people face conflict, why people go to war. And I ended up studying religion and theology for my undergraduate degree, focusing on religion and conflict in South Asia, thinking this is it, this is the solution. People go to war because of religion. Little did I know, once I started studying it, that became very clear to me that that was not the case. I did work in the interfaith space for a while. Domestically, I worked with the Anchorage Interfaith Council and the North American Interfaith Network. And those were both really fantastic experiences. But I decided I wanted to think bigger. So I got my master's in international peace, and from there have been working in the peace building field. Worked at Alliance for Peace Building, Women in International Security, and Safer World. And while I was at Safer World, which is a UK-based NGO, one of the things that was really fantastic, and that's really I've tried to carry forward in my work at FCNL as well, is we were really listening to our communities on the ground that we were working with and saying, how can the US better support your work? So we had programming in Somalia. And, sometimes our Somalia team would ask us for really big requests, things like ending drone warfare. And it was a fantastic challenge, but we were a 2-person office in Washington. So, there was also a certain amount of what's achievable versus what's needed. And it was just really great to be able to connect how we're thinking about these issues here in the US and how we think about our role in the world with communities on the ground who see kind of the other end of the equation and see what happens when the US chooses to engage and the impact of that. So like I said, I work with FCNL now, and I'm a full-time lobbyist. So my focus is pushing Congress to do better. It's an uphill battle much of the time, but we have seen a lot of momentum in the last few years on peace building in particular, as the 20th anniversary of 9/11 approaches, and a lot of new members have come into Congress from different generations and generations that have really felt the impact of 9/11 and the post 9/11 wars. There's a lot more conversation on the left and the right about how we can change how we engage with the world. So with that, the report that we just released, and you can find it online at fcnl.org/prioritizepeace. It's looking at what's a new vision for US foreign policy and what can the Biden administration do in its first 100 days to really make that happen. So we were trying to think as specific and tangible of recommendations, getting into that nitty gritty, but also really thinking about the bigger vision. I think it's easy to either get lost in the details or lost in the clouds. And we were trying to find that right balance between the two. So why did we need a new approach? I think, I'm talking to a fairly friendly audience. I think you guys understand a lot of the issues that face US foreign policy at the moment. But one thing with this report is that we had started planning it in November of 2019. So we knew the election was coming, but we didn't know who the Democratic nominee would be. The pandemic was this distant, maybe something's happening in China. And so we were really just looking at this kind of from the status quo of 2019. What's the need for a new approach? And as 2020 unfolded, that became much more sharp in our minds. So just quickly, a couple of the things that really showed us why we needed this new approach is just how outdated our current system is. The State Department is still designed for the Cold War. It still thinks about state-state relations. It struggles to really engage at that kind of community level, at that human level, where a lot of today's conflict and a lot of today's violence is happening. We still, in our diplomacy and our development, we still really think about who are countries aligned with? Are you aligning with China? Are you aligning with Russia? We're still thinking like it's the Cold War, and it's just not. The world has changed so much. Questions of religious persecution, rising authoritarianism, climate change, a lot of the things that we're seeing affect us domestically, we are also seeing affect countries around the world. And our current models, there's not a good way to deal with, organizations like Boko Haram, who aren't a state actor. They don't have a government liaison. They don't have a foreign minister. They don't exist just within the border of one country or another. Their ideas spread over the internet. They spread through radio, through media. How can we be effective at preventing violence from groups like this if we're set up like it's 1980 and we're at the height of the Cold War? So this is one of the big problem sets we were looking at. It's just like, how do we break this mold? How do we actually deal with these kind of problems? So like I was saying, with this transactional state-to-state relationship, one of the other big side effects is not only are we not actually addressing the problems that exist, we are exacerbating other issues by selling weapons to abusive regimes, because we need Egypt to be stable. It needs to be a stable, sea of tranquility in a complicated Middle East. So we're not going to look at the level of the human. We're not going to think about human security. We're going to think about keeping this country stable. We're going to help prop it up. We're going to sell it arms. We're going to train their military, even if that military, that government isn't respecting human rights. And by doing that, we also then feed the cycle of the violence by allowing, by not speaking truth to our friends. And as they continue to abuse the human rights of their own citizens, those citizens then look toward other means. If they don't have a democratic outlet, they look toward taking up arms, toward the use of violence. So we're just kind of feeding this power cycle, not only not addressing the problem, but also making it all worse. And lastly, as over 2020, we've really seen the impact of COVID at home and abroad. I think the events that happened last week here in DC, I think in part this long isolation, this long economic downturn has sparked more anger, more fear among people. We are experiencing a very mild version of what a lot of countries are experiencing during this pandemic. the US withdrawing from the World Health Organization has highlighted how fragile our institutions are that are meant to help us work as a cooperative world. You know, we've seen childhood vaccinations the rate of childhood vaccination has gone back 25 years in 25 weeks. I mean, we are falling behind so many global development efforts because of the COVID pandemic. And it's just exacerbating inequality. It's breaking down the ties that bind communities together. We've seen, you know, one of the things that we've seen that's really scary is, you know, in Africa, there's been a lot of development work by the Chinese government and Chinese contractors. And so we've seen a lot of that kind of starting to, with the pandemic, we're seeing local communities shun and fear Asians because they think this virus comes from Asia. And so that kind of breakdown and that kind of xenophobia can feed violence very easily. And just one note, a recent data model showed that 13 more countries will likely experience civil war in the next 2 years than we were expecting. And so it's almost double what we were expecting. And we're just really concerned about making sure that this pandemic doesn't lead to a pandemic of violence. So that's kind of where we're at. It's a little bit of kind of context setting. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about how we came up with this report, and then we'll dig into what's in it. So one thing we didn't want to do is sort of be a few people at FCNL sitting down and pulling out of our head our vision for what we think is wrong and how we need to fix it. We really wanted to try and make this a whole of community query, asking folks from across the foreign policy spectrum. So we talked to people that work at the American Enterprise Institute, which is a very conservative organization. We spoke with people who were part of, you know, weapons of mass destruction and chemical weapon prohibitions, you know, people who think about these issues, but don't necessarily see it from a peace building perspective. Spoke to people who focus on the UN, who focus on UN peacekeeping efforts, and are really trying to get as big of a picture, broad of a picture as we could. And out of these expert interviews, out of these surveys and literature reviews, there was a couple of big themes that came out. One, peace fundamentally is not a political priority, and it hasn't been. Stability has been political priorities, counterterrorism has been political priorities, but the vision of a peaceful world just hasn't been prioritized by politicians. We undercut our own achievements when we spend millions of dollars on supporting, you know, the health system of Somalia, and then we send drones and commit drone strikes in the same place. You know, we do a lot of really great diplomacy, we do a lot of really great development, but our military approaches, our hard, violent responses to a lot of issues undercut all of that good work. There's also a double standard of success, and I'm sure you guys have seen this in the news, where they talk about a military operation successfully killed 7 militants. But when you talk to people about what success is in development or in peace building, they talk about, oh, we lifted so many people out of poverty. Oh, we trained so many people on conflict resolution skills. And we need to hold our military to the same success metrics. You know, did this action actually reduce violence, or did it just inspire more? A lot of bureaucratic structures. The Pentagon is several, I think it's like 20,000 people. The State Department is several thousand, they're much smaller. And they are archaic, difficult Byzantine structures. And getting change to happen in these structures is incredibly difficult. We also just don't have the staff the Trump administration has decimated staff at State Department, at USAID, and we don't have a diverse staff anymore. We don't have a highly skilled staff. And so how do we just rebuild our diplomatic corps? How do we just have the diplomats that are at the caliber of those that helped bring peace in Northern Ireland, those that helped with the Dayton Accords? You know, we've just really lost a whole generation of diplomats. And then lastly, peace builders are first responders in this pandemic. As I was talking about, you know, a lot of the things that this pandemic has shown us in terms of the rising violence, peace builders really should be on the front lines, should be thought of similar to health responders. You know, how can we make sure that all of our responses to the pandemic itself are conflict sensitive, as we say, are aware of the dynamics in the situation so that they don't make things worse. So, going to dig into the report. And I'm sorry, I just saw the chat. I will answer your questions shortly. Please keep putting them in the chat and I will get to them. Sorry. So how do we get there in the first 100 days? We kind of put together these 6 buckets, and I'll talk about what's inside each of the buckets as we go through. But like I said, we're really thinking about this as like the immediate actions that Biden can take, you know, in his first 3 months. So we see this as kind of phase 1 of a larger project, and I'll talk a little bit about that larger project shortly. But the 6 buckets really sit as our vision for the different areas that can be worked on over the next several years. So making peace building a priority, you know, not making sure that the politicians from the president down, from, you know, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, they see peace as a priority, and that they make it clear to the staff under them that they want to see results, they want to see change. Doing no harm. So things like arms sales and, you know, security assistance, making sure that if we're doing this work, we aren't exacerbating conflict. Strengthening the voice of peace building and human rights in our foreign policy architecture, which really goes down to some of those Byzantine bureaucratic structures where by trying to maintain a status quo, and we need to stay friends with Egypt, the voice of human rights defenders in our State Department often gets left out. Increasing staff diversity as well as capacity, making sure we hire really talented future diplomats, positioning peace in the middle of our foreign assistance. So when we do global health efforts, when we do economic development, when we're building schools, we're thinking about including peace education. We're thinking about, will this support make things better or make things worse? And then just reaffirming our commitment to global cooperation. You know, after 4 years with this president, we've burned a lot of bridges, we've left a lot of multilateral institutions, and just really making sure we're back and saying to the world, we want to be here, we want to cooperate. You know, one thing that concerns myself is you listen to Biden talk about our role in the world, and he really sees it in that bit of that Cold War mindset of we have to lead, we have to be in charge. And for me, especially with the events of the last few weeks, it's more of how can we engage in a humble way? How can we use our massive economic power engine and resources to help those who ask for help without having to be quite so in the driver's seat on everyone else's agendas. So this is where I'm going to dig into some of the specifics. And if I understand our timing right, do we have about 20 minutes or how much more time do I have?
We want to give you ample time to cover your key slides. We like to take questions a little after the top of the hour.
Oh, perfect. Okay, that's great. I just trying to do the time zone conversions. Wanted to make sure I wasn't talking past your opportunity to ask me questions. So if you read the report itself, which is at fcnl.org/prioritizepeace, you can see all of these recommendations in full. And like I said, they're very in the weeds. We wanted to make sure that this was as specific as possible to make it clear. We aren't asking you to prioritize peace. We are asking you to specifically mention peace and peace building in your national security strategy. If you read President-elect Biden's two major foreign policy statements he made during the campaign, one that was his issue statement on his website, the other was an article in Foreign Affairs magazine. He doesn't mention the word peace once. He has several thousand words on his vision for foreign policy, but the word peace doesn't appear anywhere in it. And we want peace included in our national security strategy. That document really drives all of our other foreign engagements, our engagement on climate change, our the work that the Commerce Department does around trade, all these areas align under our national security strategy. So we want peace in there. Specifically including in the Secretary of State and Administrator of USAID's job descriptions that you are in charge of getting results on peace building. Not sort of saying somebody should do this somewhere, but you need to show me results. Making it a core category in our budget. So if the recent budget agreement this December was 5,000 pages long. I have not read the whole thing, but if you read the international affairs budget, there's a category for global health. There's a category for development assistance, economic assistance. And we think there should be a category for peace. Bring all these bits and pieces where the money does go under one heading. And that also helps elevate it and tells from Congress, this is what we think this is a major priority, a central effort that USAID and the State Department will work on. And then as well, on the National Security Council, appointing a senior director who's going to look across the Department of Defense, Treasury, Commerce, Justice, Homeland Security, State Department, USAID, across the whole government. They can bring everyone to the table and talk about peace building, talk about human rights, talk about how we're engaged in the world. I will say we already have evidence that last point was not taken up. They did appoint a senior director for human rights, which is really fantastic. But so far, we haven't seen someone focused on peace building. So the second big bucket on doing no harm, like I said, it's ending arms sales and security assistance to countries that have abused human rights. Right now, we have Leahy vetting, named after Senator Leahy, which asks, can we train this unit within a foreign military? Have they committed human rights abuses in the past? Well, that's really important, but you can just rename a unit, and people do it all the time. You can disband a unit and put them in together in a new unit. And now, according to our vetting process, that brand new unit is free from past human rights abuses. So we're saying, don't do it at the unit level, do it at the country level. Really look at the whole country. Ending sanctions that are broad sanctions that impact civilians and cause just completely unnecessary harm, especially during this pandemic. It shouldn't be difficult for Iran to get medicine. It shouldn't be difficult for areas under the control of foreign terrorist organizations to get medicine during a pandemic. And then as well, just making sure, like I said, we're conducting assessments, risk assessments of any of our arms sales, any of our security assistance. FCNL would love to just end security assistance, end arms sales, but this was looking at kind of that first 100 days. So step one is this small first step, big vision from FCNL, end security assistance, end arms sales. And then this last point, I think, is one of those that's maybe less apparent to a lot of people, but the Defense Department has a huge planning work. They do a ton of planning, country strategies, things like that. And the State Department and USAID are often left out of the process. So the Defense Department draws up these big plans, but they're not looking at what civilian harm is this doing? How can we achieve objectives of peace and stability, but do it through diplomacy, do it through development? So it's not endorsing this sort of defense planning, but making sure that people focused on human rights, focused on sort of that civilian level are included in those plans. So strengthening the voice of peace building and human rights at the State Department. This is very in the weeds. And one of the reasons I'm so thankful that we took this whole of community approach, because it looks at a lot of really specific things that I didn't know were issues. So I'll just highlight one of them, which is this non-concurrence model of policy clearance, which sounds like the most jargony, most in the weeds, ridiculous kind of phrase. But what it's saying is when we want to change our approach to a country, the country embassy and the country desk officer, the people at the State Department representing the Philippines, can veto any new approach. They can just say, nope, this would disrupt our relationship with the state of the Philippines. We are going to continue doing what we've always done. We're saying, instead of having one perspective veto changes, you can just say, I don't agree with this, but the policy can then go to the next level of review and senior leaders can make these choices. What that allows is that a disagreement from someone thinking only about US-Philippine relations is at the same level as someone thinking about human rights in the Philippines. As someone whose job at the State Department is fully focused on peace building, on human rights, and they can get their voice included in these questions. And that is one of those like little bureaucratic changes that could really change how the whole organization thinks about these relationships and break down that idea that we're one state talking to another state, but instead saying we're humans talking to humans, and how do we protect these communities better. Increasing staff diversity and capacity to build peace. One thing I think that's often overlooked is within bureaucratic organizations like the State Department and USAID, is that by not having a diverse workforce that reflects America as a diverse nation, one, we aren't doing a good job as diplomats. Those representing us abroad should look like us at home, should have the variety of experiences that we have here in the US. But also, it changes how decisions are being made. It changes the perspectives at the table. So one of our big points was really ambitious hiring and retention of women, LGBTQ individuals, persons of color, including Black and Indigenous individuals. I had a real honor once to meet the first Native American ambassador from the US to the UN Human Rights Council. And he said being a Native American and sitting at the UN Human Rights Council talking about America and human rights, he's like, nobody else except an Indigenous person who has experienced, you know, the suffering caused by the federal government can speak with such honesty. about the US's commitment to human rights, and speak with honesty about the vision we want to set forward for ourselves. So making sure that our foreign service, our diplomats reflect who we are as a nation. Also, just hiring more people with experience in human rights with degrees in peace building so that they're not all political scientists and economists. Second to last, positioning peace at the center of US foreign assistance. And this is really just getting at the need to, when we're doing sort of our foreign assistance, when we're doing global health work, education, economic development, we're thinking about, will this make the conflict worse? Will this make conflict better? How can we bring peace into the broader efforts that we're doing? I think, one interesting example is, in Sudan, there's a lot of conflict between the pastoralists who graze cattle and farmers who want to protect the land that they're farming along the Nile. And, I think it was the organization Mercy Corps did a project where they were working on women's economic empowerment. And so they would build these marketplaces and give preference to women traders to come and exchange goods. They also purposefully invited women who were pastoral, who herded cattle, as well as women farmers, to joint trainings, to joint marketplaces, and didn't say, we're trying to make you guys be better friends, this is kumbaya, but just created consistent opportunities for these women to come together. And they realized, as they spend more and more time together, they're facing a lot of the same challenges. And while there are issues between their two communities, they aren't as big as they thought they were, and they were able to not only lift up these women's economic power in the community, they were also able to build peace between these, two conflicting communities. And so it's this kind of lens of, we don't have to stop what we're doing, but how can we use what we're already doing to build peace? And it's often just small changes to the work that can really create a lot of opportunities. And then rejoining the global community and partnership. We haven't paid our full dues to the WHO this year. Congress has tried to force the administration to do it, and it might, in the end, come through. We have left the UN Human Rights Council. We left UNESCO. We need to rejoin these as quickly as possible. Rejoining the JCPOA, which is the formal name of the Iran nuclear deal. Rejoining the Paris Climate Agreement. Signing the Mine Ban Treaty. There's just so many of these things that, as president, you can make these executive decisions very quickly. Trump decided to sanction investigators as part of who work for the International Criminal Court. No, we're not doing that. We can reverse that on day one. We can lift these sanctions. We can say, we believe in international accountability for war crimes. And if they're going to investigate US action in Afghanistan, we welcome that investigation and that accountability. So just quickly, before we sort of move into questions so that there's plenty of time, just wanted to give you a quick view of where we're going with this. So like I said, we published this in December. It's been shared with several hundred foreign policy influencers here in DC, including over 100 members of the Biden administration transition team. 85% of the Biden folks have read our outreach email, which is really exciting. They've seen it. They've, we had a lot of emails in response, thanking us for it, reflecting on the recommendations. And next month, we'll be hosting sort of an event really targeting Biden appointees to walk them through this as well. We're also developing a congressional agenda. So taking these same 6 buckets and then saying, what is Congress's job? How can Congress support ending arms sales? How can Congress, So we're hoping to have that out in the next couple months. I have to write it. So it's always lots of priorities going on, but I'm really looking forward to kind of thinking about phase 2 and how do we connect both what the administration can do and what Congress can do. And then lastly, what you guys can do. So fcnl.org/peacebuilding, you can learn about all the different areas of work we have. You can read the full report. If you want to write a letter to your members of Congress, on the global COVID response, less than 1% of the funding we've spent so far on COVID relief has gone outside of our borders. So if you want to ping your member of Congress, we have a very quick and easy way to do that at fcnl.org/global COVID response. And to look at other kind of broader issues, if you want to write your member of Congress, I know several of you are part of an advocacy team, and there's lots of other ways to engage with Congress at FCNL. So fcnl.org/Congress or /lobby from home will get you all sorts of different resources, and not just on peace building, but kind of across all of our various issues. So with that, I will stop, and I'm happy to flip back to any of the slides or anything as we go through questions. So the 13 countries expected to experience civil war in the near future does not include the US. The US was not included on the original data model either. But one of the things FCNL works on is on atrocity prevention, genocide prevention. And a lot of indicators for potential mass violence are growing and ringing a lot of alarm bells among the community. So while we don't expect civil war in the US, we are looking at, with a lot of grave concern, looking at the potential for mass violence. Thank you, Grace. That's very thoughtful. Can you send us basic peace building info that you expressed? Yes, I will happily send the whole PowerPoint, not a problem. And like I said, fcnl.org/peacebuilding, you can see all the different 100 priorities we have. There's a lot of work to do to get world peace, but we're gonna do it. We're gonna put in the work. And then how will the voice of peace? Yes, excellent question, Joseph. And this is one thing where we actually do see opportunities from the corporate voices. And FCNL is, I would say, thoughtful in its partnerships with those who might not agree with us on everything. So I like to think of it as going in with your eyes open. We partner with a lot of Republicans, have a lot of really good history in partnering with Republicans. And with some of the corporate voices, we try and think of it as, with peace, you have open markets. With peace, you have stable places to conduct business. Your contracts will be upheld because there is a functioning court system that seeks justice, not bribes. And so we do see many kind of large conglomerates and folks like, Chevron, people like that, want peace, wanting stability. We, however, are happy to work with them in that way, but we do also think very carefully about, is this organization causing serious environmental degradation? Is this organization causing human suffering or harm through their efforts? And I do think from the political space and kind of getting their voice, the sort of giant gorilla in the room, this recent turn of events where we're seeing corporate donors cut funding to political parties, to politicians,
Yes,
positive opportunity to kind of
yes,
encourage more of that behavior.
yes, cutting funding, yes.
Yeah, exactly. Getting their money out of politics. But it's an uphill battle. It's a certain amount of a Sisyphean task. You know, we're rolling the boulder up the hill and watching it roll back down. But every time that doesn't get quite as far. And then I see there's 2 questions left, and then I see Rose and Steve, you have your hands up. Peace building important for getting children in homes. So I think, so one thing Dr. Ruby, to your question about at the beginning, putting peace kind of in child development, one of the really exciting changes in the last, I don't know, maybe 5 years, maybe decade, has been the amount of peace building done as part of a humanitarian response. So the crisis in Syria and the refugee crisis it created, the Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh, how major humanitarian crisis response actors are putting peace building at the center of their work so that they can help prevent the next crisis. So there's a lot of really good work with children in refugee camps to help them deal with their trauma, to help them see conflict resolution as something that's nonviolent, and really kind of putting peace education alongside basic childhood development, basic education. I do think it's easier to teach a child to be peaceful than it is to teach an adult who's experienced decades of trauma. So trying to help children as early as possible, you're always going to have better results, to be blunt, than trying to help older people rewire their brains, especially after the trauma of conflict. And I think, Steve, you had your hand up. You have a question?
Thank you. I cannot thank you enough on behalf of the whole group, and you're seeing some of it in the chat. This was an extraordinary presentation, and I know you stand on the shoulders of amazing people that contributed to this report. Before I ask my question, you are such an opening for our meeting next week, and I want to announce this to the whole group. That we are taking a hard look at our agenda for 2021 at ICUJP. A week from Sunday, the board of directors is meeting in a Zoom retreat. And to inform the retreat, a week from Sunday, next Friday's meeting will be an open discussion with everyone here and others, really to look at the past, present, and future, what works and doesn't work for ICUJP, and you have given us an agenda and resources that will help inform that discussion. And through Anthony, Ursula, you have a lot of partners on this screen right now. You are now a card-carrying member of ICUJP. You are welcome back to these Friday morning sessions. And we are going to stay on this as your partner in lobbying, in speaking out, in letter writing, and all of the action items. So please know that you have really inspired us today.
Thank you.
My question in that vein is, who are our highest allies in the Senate and the House? We often write letters, we criticize legislators, but sometimes we've got to support the good ones that are doing good work. Who do you feel, given your work on the Hill and elsewhere, are our best hope for this kind of an agenda to be part of their legislative agenda for the next 4 years?
That is an excellent question. And to be honest, California, you guys come in with a lot of great leadership. Barbara Lee and Karen Bass in the House are such deeply steadfast believers in peace and peace building. They fight constantly to keep this on the agenda. You know, Barbara Lee is just, I mean, I cannot praise her enough, being the only member of Congress to stand up against going to war after 9/11 and not turning back and not caving to the pressure. Karen Bass has chaired the Congressional Black Caucus's Africa and Global Policy Task Force. And I'm sure as many of you know, the Congressional Black Caucus has always been a huge moral voice and shown a lot of moral leadership. And so it's also very exciting that Gregory Meeks will be the new chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. He has shown a lot of commitment on these issues and is really open as well to voices from civil society, you know, not just sort of corporate donors, as we were saying earlier. And, you know, Joaquin Castro in the House has also been a really great ally of a lot of these issues. I think Ami Bera, who's also from California, he co-chairs the Diplomacy Caucus, and he's really committed to changing how we support the State Department and making sure that there is kind of a broad, diverse State Department that has the capabilities it needs to lead and to really push and be in the room so that it's not just the military kind of as the last resort, but that we've got a capable State Department. And then on the Senate side, well, I would say Ann Wagner in Missouri was a diehard champion in supporting the Elie Wiesel, and she's a Republican, Elie Wiesel Genocide and Atrocity Prevention Act. She has spoken out multiple times to increase funding to peace building accounts. So she's been a really fantastic ally. And then on the Senate side, Cory Booker has been really great. Ben Cardin, Chris Coons, Chris Murphy, Kamala Harris was great. So we're excited to meet your new senator. And I mean, Senator Feinstein has also been a real champion. I think though she's been more of a champion on the war, ending endless war kind of perspective than the sort of alternative approach of peace building. I think there's a lot of education that needs to be done about it's not just ending the bad thing, it's promoting the good thing. So yeah, I think those are sort of the people that really jump out. I will say for all of his particularities, Marco Rubio has been an ardent supporter of human rights. He has been an ardent supporter of atrocity prevention. You know, so, and Mitt Romney has been a supporter of the UN and American diplomacy, you know, so it's not, definitely not a one-sided issue, but we do see more champions to the left of the aisle than to the right.
Has Dick Durbin been helpful in any way?
Yeah, absolutely. And so has Senator Leahy. He's been chairman of the Appropriations Committee now. He has been ranking member the last several Senates, but now he gets to be chairman. Thank you, Georgia. And he's been a really powerhouse supporter.
Something else that you said kind of resonated with me. It's a slightly sidebar really, but you were talking about the difficulty with the State Department and the bureaucracy in Washington and getting things moving, which I'm sure is absolutely true. And we have heard for the last 4 years exactly the same thing from the other side. And they even changed the laws so that some of these senior civil servants will lose all their protections. And I imagine that's the left-wing ones. But now that we're in, I mean, I just wondered if you had any insight on what's going to happen in the terms of the bureaucracy and if it's any way of making it work more efficiently.
So I think one really positive opportunity in the next 4 years is the fact that Anthony Blinken is going to be Secretary of State, most likely. He comes from a decades-long dedicated career in the Foreign Service. He knows the State Department inside and out, backwards and forwards. He knows where these problems are. And having someone like that lead the charge is really great and gives us a lot of opportunities to fix some of these issues. You know, the fact that the strategic planning office is separate than the budget office, so that plans are drawn up and money is spent, they're not necessarily in communication with each other. Those kind of fixes, someone like Anthony Blinken knows what that issue is and can do the work to bring them together. One really positive thing, I think, throughout the Trump administration, Mark Green has been leading USAID, our development agency, and he's been a very steady leader of that organization, and he transformed, is the word they used. They reorganized the U.S. Agency on International Development, USAID. And so they did a really amazing job. It took them 3 years, but they restructured the entire internal bureaucracy. They created new positions to help streamline, make efficiencies. They brought together various offices so that things like planning and budget were in the same office together. So I think seeing what USAID has done, and USAID created a whole new bureau dedicated to conflict prevention, which is so fantastic. And so seeing what USAID has done gives me a lot of hope for what Anthony Blinken can do at the State Department. It's going to take years to really do the deep kind of fixes we need, but there's a lot of early opportunities. And I think he's someone who knows the problems well enough to focus on fixing them.
Thank you. That's very reassuring.
Yeah, I recently received this email from the so-called Democratic Party asking, it was a survey, and which of these issues are important to you. It did not mention peace at all. And fortunately, I had a little checkbox with a field to write in where I wrote in, why are you not mentioning peace? So I suggest anybody who gets that from the Dems, challenge them why peace is not even an issue we're asked if we care about. You talked about international cooperation and the pandemic. And I'm wondering if you are considering supporting the Cuban doctors that have been way out in front in terms of international cooperation, fighting the pandemic.
Yeah, we haven't done anything specifically in support of them, but I feel like Cuban doctors are in such a difficult position where a lot of times they don't have choice over where they're sent. They do such amazing work supporting communities across Brazil and Venezuela and Colombia. I mean, they're on the front lines in so many of these really, really difficult places, doing the best medicine that they can. One thing we are trying to do, one is create what is called a temporary general license. And what that means is it's temporary, it's broad license for humanitarian assistance in places that are sanctioned. So the idea is there's a pandemic. We don't need to we shouldn't be wasting our time doing really specific licensing to like, okay, this company can ship masks into Iran, you know, that kind of thing. Let's just give a temporary general license. Any humanitarian aid can go anywhere in the world where it's needed as quickly as possible. And we're also supporting, sorry, these are very jargony phrases, but special drawing rights at the at the IMF, at the International Monetary Fund. And basically, it's a way for countries who are on the lower end income scale to pull money from the IMF at incredibly low interest rates to pay very quickly for emergency supplies, to allow for countries who need cash right now to buy supplies to get it quickly. So we're looking at a lot of different ways that we can help support a lot of these places where, the Cuban doctors are working, as you say, so incredibly hard on the front lines, so that they can get as much support as possible. And Fernando, yes.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for your presentation. It's very informative. You spoke about the foreign policy, and one of my concerns is the neoliberalization policies that's affecting not just here at home in the US, but all over the world. This policy is making those countries poor, and so they are forced to migrate, and many of them are experiencing these racial, unfortunate racial biases in the black and brown in particular. And so I don't know if you can integrate these neoliberalization policies that's affecting everyone in your mission to Washington, D.C. And so maybe you can elaborate a little bit on that. Thank you. No,
that's an excellent question. And I see your hand, Simon. So I think one of the peculiarities of how FCNL works is we have a domestic team and a foreign policy team. And it's kind of a fake distinction because exactly as you're saying, what we do at home, what we do abroad, it's all so interconnected these days. So on our domestic team, we have several staff that work on economic justice and that look at these kind of questions of how is this kind of modern capitalism, neoliberal ideas, how can we make sure that there's real economic justice, that we're really supporting workers, that we're supporting everyone to have an equitable shot around the world. And then as well, we have our immigration and refugee team who are considered domestic policy, but we work very closely with them because what happens abroad is so impactful on what happens in terms of migration and refugees to the US. And they work a lot thinking through not only pushing the US to accept more refugees, to do be more open and more welcoming as a nation, but we also talk a lot, them, the climate team, myself, at sort of what are the drivers, what are pushing people to seek refuge in America? What are pushing people to be, make these incredibly difficult choices to walk thousands of miles to our southern border through such danger to themselves and their family? Something is more dangerous at home if they're making these kind of choices. So how can, as the peace building team, how can we help address the things that are pushing people from their communities? And same, how can the climate change team address some of these issues that are the climate change side of things that are pushing people from their communities? So we do see it as kind of all interconnected. And I definitely really hear what you're saying around sort of some of the modern capitalist policies that really leave a lot of people in a lot of communities behind and sort of force them to look elsewhere. And it's sad to see communities slowly losing so many of their youth and so many of their young people as they're sort of migrating for work and for other issues. And I think, Simon, you had a question?
Yes. Ursula, you made a great presentation of the religious society, our friends, the Quakers. And I just want to mention three things. One is that the Quakers are the only religious group in the world who received the Nobel Peace Prize in 1947 from Norway for their peaceful work. So they have a long track of peace building from their foundation in 1647. Second, Martin Luther King himself and his group as Baptists were going to oppose the segregation by the white government and people in similar violent terms, but a Quaker within King Martin's group was a Quaker. He persuaded them not to use violence and go to non-violence like Gandhi had done, and that gave them further strength. And the third thing, which is very important, is the following. As long as there are sovereign states who have the power to do whatever they like within their country and with their neighbors, all these things that you're advocating are, small pieces towards peace building. But in order to have something that really works is to look at two examples. One is the European Union, built from 1949 to include 28 nations with Brexit this last year by United Kingdom. But they have all the things that you mentioned within them built in the last 70 plus years. They have had peace, but not only peace, but all the things that go with peace, namely free education to the top university level, free healthcare in addition to peace, free justice for its citizens, etc., etc., etc. And so built on that model, I've been working on enlarging that 28 nations to the world into a 195 country world union instead of the European Union. I've given talks to various organizations. And I think unless we do that, where there are supranational states, where all sovereign states have to obey the supranational laws for peace and all the other positive things we are seeking, it won't happen in our lifetime. But that's what is needed, a world union of all 195 nations. And that, like the European Union, will have free education, free healthcare, justice for women, etc., LGBTs, and so on.
Yeah, and I wanted to first say I had completely forgotten in the stress of the last 2 weeks that today is Martin Luther King's birthday. So I'm very thankful for the reflections at the start of this and the reminder, Simon, of the Quakers' role in the civil rights movement. I think it's something that's easy to overlook these days when we're sort of dealing with our own immediate crises. But I think one thing that I agree we really need a deeper level of international commitment and cooperation in terms of, I mean, since 9/11, the UN has become really emaciated and has lost a lot of its moral clarity on the world stage. And I think one thing that makes me very hopeful is President-elect Biden's deep commitment to the United Nations. He really believes it has a role, and it has its flaws, absolutely. I mean, if you want to talk about Byzantine bureaucracies, the UN does it better than anyone. But his strong commitment, as well as Linda Thomas Greenfield, who will be the US ambassador to the UN, she will sit as a cabinet level position alongside, the Secretary of Commerce, the Secretary of Treasury. She will sit at the table and bring the perspectives of the UN to American decision-making, but also elevate her role, elevate our commitment to the UN. And personally, I think it's so incredibly exciting that we're going to have you know, this amazing Black woman representing the United States on the Security Council, at the UN, you know, on the world stage. This is the vision of America that we want to put forward, which is so exciting. We don't, you know, how we show up changes what we think. So very excited for that. And I think in the short term, there are a lot of opportunities to reform the UN, to improve the UN. And, you know, hopefully we can, if the US can pay its full dues, you know, the US pays 22% of the UN budget. And so when we cut what we pay, you know, at the moment we owe over $900 million to the UN peacekeepers. And they swear up and down, because it's a very political issue. The UN peacekeeping says, oh, it's fine. It's not affecting, you know, anything. We're fine. Please give us what money you do give. But until we pay that missing $1 billion, until we really commit to the UN, you know, we're also holding the UN back. We are preventing it from being as successful as it could be as a gathering place for the world to deal with disputes through diplomacy, through dialogue, through, you know, a shared commitment to each other's humanity rather than through violence. I think it's also really interesting this year, the Myanmar government was brought before the International, I don't think it was the International Criminal Court, it was the International Court of Justice. And now that I say that, I'm sure it's the opposite. But they were brought forward on charges of genocide. And it wasn't the US, it wasn't Europe, it was Gambia. Gambia said, how it works at the ICJ is that one country can sort of call out another country. And the Gambia said, we want to take responsibility. We want to initiate an investigation into the Rohingya genocide. And it's exciting to see other countries outside of just sort of the dominant Western Northern nations really stepping up in these spaces and really showing leadership where the rest of the world hasn't. So I'm excited, maybe after these 4 years of America's retreat, we can come back in a more humble way, and we've created more space for other countries to also show leadership and also help remind us what some of our American values are that we might have forgotten over the last several years. So